Welcome to Andy Staples On3. We knew what this show was going to be about midnight Sunday night when USA Today dropped a bombshell of a story about Mel Tucker, the Michigan State head coach, and it was a sexual harassment complaint filed by Brenda Tracy, who is an advocate for victims' rights, who speaks to college football teams across the country, including Michigan State. The details of it, pretty nasty. And if you got youngsters in the car or watching on the YouTube stream, so you may tell them earmuffs or maybe you just skip past this part right now. But it's bad. And basically, she accuses Mel Tucker of masturbating on the phone while talking to her, trying to start a relationship with her. And Mel Tucker responds with, no, it was a mutual consensual thing, but admits to doing the really gross thing that she accuses him of, which that alone probably is enough to have Michigan State take action, because this is a contractor that the university is bringing in for a service. This is someone, there's a power dynamic here. Absolutely, probably enough to make a case for firing Mel Tucker for cause. So this investigation has been going on since December when she filed the complaint. He was interviewed in March. Kenny Jacoby wrote the story in USA Today, had all of the documents basically from the investigation. And it was a thorough accounting of everything that's happened. And what's most interesting about it is it is a he said, she said, but the facts that they agree upon probably are enough to make it where Mel Tucker can never recruit again, can never go into a recruit's house, talk to recruits' parents without them thinking of this. And Tim D brings up, if it was the 90s, they had all those sex line infomercials. Yes, they had those in the 90s, where it's like $1.99 or $2.99 a minute. This one may have cost $80 million. It may have been the most expensive phone sex of all time, because Mel Tucker had a 10-year, $95 million guaranteed contract. And after Michigan State went 5-7 last year, I imagine there were quite a few people trying to figure out how to get out of that, because unless he was going to be bringing in Ohio State level recruiting classes, they weren't going to be getting what they were paying for. So the cynics out there are going, oh, okay, they're just trying to get out of the contract. It can be both. It can be an incredibly stupid decision and an incredibly callous act. I mean, he's married at the time this is going on, by the way. Let's not gloss over that. It also could be that Michigan State is using this opportunity to get rid of Mel Tucker and get out of that contract. Now, he has been suspended without pay as of Monday afternoon, or as of Sunday afternoon. Why suspended without pay now is a very interesting question. But first, let's hear Alan Haller, the AD at Michigan State, discussing what he's done on Sunday with Mel Tucker.
I'm here to provide an update on an active and ongoing investigation. Before I share that update, it's important to know that I'm limited in the information I can share and the questions I can answer, because this is an investigation is still ongoing. Upon receiving the reports from the claimant regarding Mel Tucker, MSU's Office of Civil Rights immediately commenced a review of subsequent investigation per university protocol using an outside third-party investigator. I was aware of the report in late December. The external investigator concluded their review and submitted their investigative report on July 25th with the recommendation for a formal hearing, which will occur the week of October 5th. The university's objective has been and remains focused on conducting a fair, thorough, and unbiased investigation and allowing the processes to play out. This includes protecting confidentiality of the claimant and putting in place interim measures. The university's formal conclusion of the investigation will occur once the hearing and final decision processes are complete. I want to emphasize again This investigation is not complete. Interim measures are something that are constantly evaluated throughout the process based on developments that may have a potential impact on the ongoing investigation. As there have been new developments before the hearing, and with the best interests of everyone, including student athletes and the university community in mind, I have suspended Mel Tucker without pay as an additional interim measure. While the investigation continues, I made this decision with the support of university leadership.
So that's Alan Haller explaining that he has suspended Mel Tucker without pay. He was asked later in that press conference, why now? Why did you do this now? Why didn't you do this in July when the report was given to you? There's a hearing that's scheduled for October. Why didn't you do this in December? Why didn't you do this in March after Mel Tucker was interviewed and admitted to what he was accused of? And so Alan Haller said this: interim measures were in place, and those interim measures have been updated. Initially, there was no contact with the complainant, and then increased oversight for me of the program, but then also the coach. So it's an ongoing process, and we update those interim measures as we receive information. The information was USA Today dropped a bomb story on you, and everybody knew what was going on. Now, Teresa Woodruff, the interim president at Michigan State, got up at that same press conference and said, in the MSU of today, when any report comes into the university, is appropriately and rigorously reviewed. In the MSU of today, our investigative processes are fair and thorough. Later on, she said, so this morning's news might sound like the MSU of old. Basically, what she's saying there is, remember Larry Nassar, the doctor who was sexually abusing his patients for years and years and years and years, and no one at Michigan State would do anything about it, despite people reporting it? They didn't do anything until it appeared in the newspaper. The Indianapolis Star broke all that stuff. So what happened today? They didn't do anything until it appeared in the newspaper. That USA Today story was what lit the fuse on all this. I don't know if these guys sit around and say, we think they're stupid and they won't realize that we're only doing this because everybody found out, or they know how dumb they sound. Because this is what happened. USA Today released a story and you guys look like a bunch of clowns. That's why you suspended him now. You could have suspended him much earlier, and it probably would have been better off for everybody, because remember, this team, we don't know what's going to happen now, but Harlan Barnett, the longtime defensive assistant, he was a longtime assistant under Mark D'Antonio as well. He'll be the interim head coach. Mark D'Antonio, the former head coach, coming back to be associate head coach and just kind of be a guiding force and a hand on the till. I mean, this is what you could have done in July, and that might have been a better outcome. Michigan State plays Washington this week. It's going to be a very tough game. Washington is one of the better teams in the Pac-12 and one of the better passing offenses in the country. So we'll see what happens. But the Mel Tucker part of it, I don't get it, because I am sure there were a bunch of people at Michigan State after last season who thought, okay, we might have made a mistake. We might have acted a little too hastily when we gave him a fully guaranteed contract after the 2021 season. They had this in their hands. They could have been doing this all along. I don't know why it took the world finding out. I mean, they could have done this and then the world would have found out. Like, you could have suspended him in July when you got the full report. The world would have found out about it. This story probably would have come out still. And you would have looked like you were doing the right thing. Now you look like a bunch of idiots covering your butts. I don't understand that. And if they're worried about litigation, if they're worried about Mel Tucker suing them for firing him unjustly, they're not firing him. They're suspending him. They could have done that all along. You could have suspended him with pay pending the outcome of the hearing. You could have just suspended him in July, pending the outcome of the hearing, and said, we'll talk about it in October after we fire you for cause. Because that's what they're going to do. And maybe they'll end up having to pay him something. We'll see. But That's what they're going to do. Mel Tucker's not coaching Michigan State again. Mitch, who's a Michigan State fan, says, I don't think this is completely fair. Suspending him prior to the story coming out would have compromised the complainant's confidentiality. No, it would have. She's the one who agreed to reveal herself. No one would have had to reveal her identity. It still would have been a complaint. And rumors about this were going around already. So they could have done this. The reason they did this is because it came out in the newspaper. But make no mistake, Mel Tucker is not coaching Michigan State again. That's not going to happen. And this is, I was talking to people Sunday morning, and there were a few folks who said, well, do they have enough to fire him for cause? It doesn't matter. If they can't fire him for cause, they're going to have to find a way to pay him something to get rid of him, because he can never recruit again after this. Hugh Freeze, maybe he did. He had the situation where he got fired at Ole Miss. He was calling hookers with his university cell phone. He was fired for cause, cost him millions of dollars. He went back, was the head coach at Liberty. Now he's the head coach at Auburn. He did it. Maybe Mel Tucker can come back from this. I don't think he can, because think about who Brenda Tracy is, what her role is when she goes and speaks to college football teams, what happened to her in her life. So for those who don't know, Brenda's story is terrible. She was gang raped when she was younger by a group of college football players. And she never really got justice for that. But as part of her healing process, she started telling her story to people. And she's been going around to various college football programs across the country for years now, telling that story. And that's how they came to meet, is she spoke to the Michigan State football team. So when you're another coach and you're recruiting against Mel Tucker at this point, which, again, you're not going to have to because he's not going to be coaching. But if you were, you're just bringing that up to every recruit's mother. Every single one. You're saying, see this? And it's not even he said, she said. He's admitted to it. To the thing that is going to cause the most problems, he's already admitted to it. So there's no hope for Mel Tucker to keep coaching. And given everything that's happened, we'll see what happens with the hearing, but I would imagine they'll be able to fire him for cause. One thing that I find interesting, and it's very sad, is Brenda Tracy's assistant was going to be one of her witnesses in this hearing. She passed away because of a car accident in between when she was interviewed by the investigator and now. And so it really was going to be a purely he said, she said hearing. So I do wonder if somebody got worried that he was going to get out of the hearing okay, and then they have to allow him to keep his job. So perhaps that's why this came out. But we'll see. Backyard engineer, he said it was consensual. Yes, we've been over that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it was consensual. If you're a recruit's mom and I'm an opposing coach and I tell you that story and say, are you going to send your son to play for that guy? Consensual or not, it's going to be a problem. So that's where they're at. He's not coming back. And just it is truly amazing how I can't understand why that happened in the first place. It doesn't make any sense. But to think about the money at stake and just throwing it all away. Millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars just gone, poof. It's amazing. It is one of the all-time bag fumbles. And for Michigan State, they're getting out of what might have been one of the all-time worst contracts. So it's not what I thought the coaching carousel would open up with this year. We'll talk a little later in the show about other potential coaching carousel type openings, but this is the first one, the Michigan State job, and we'll talk more about what it means in the future later. We don't have to worry about that right now. But Harlan Barnett, Mark D'Antonio will try to right the ship here and deal with it. Now they're 2-0, but we'll see what happens. Their first challenge, first real test was coming against Washington. But this has just been a strange story. It was one of the weirdest things that I have ever seen covering this sport. And you think about it, it's college football, and I've been covering this thing for 23 years professionally now. This is one of the weirdest ones I have ever seen. I cannot believe this happened. And I think most people feel the same way. Speaking of stuff like this, the other news Saturday night, and this kind of got blown off the front page by the Mel Tucker stuff, is Art Briles was visiting Oklahoma wearing his Oklahoma gear. He's on the field. Now, anybody who knows Oklahoma's assistant coaching situation probably figured this was going to happen at some point. Jeff Lebby is Oklahoma's offensive coordinator. Jeff Lebby is Art Briles' son-in-law. Jeff Lebby was on the staff at Baylor when Art Briles was fired, and that was after an investigation, and they said that Art Briles did not handle sexual assault complaints properly, and Baylor fired him. Now, he's been considered fairly toxic at most schools that he's appeared at. Well, he appears on the field at Oklahoma wearing Oklahoma gear. Jeff Lebby says, look, he's my children's grandfather. What do you want? Joe Castiglione, the athletic director, says, no, that's not supposed to happen. Brent Venables says it'll be dealt with. So we'll see. But you hired Jeff Lebby. You didn't think his wife's dad was going to show up eventually? That was going to happen. So I don't get Oklahoma acting all shocked and weirded out by this. Like, you knew this was going to happen. But again, that Mel Tucker news just completely blew it off the page. All right, on to football type stuff. We got new polls after Saturday's action. And that's the question we were asking last night with Jesse Simonson as he was doing the predict the poll. Where will Texas wind up? Number 4 in the AP poll, 2 first place votes for the Longhorns. And my guess is the 2 first place voters are people who vote in a way that only what has happened this season counts. I did that when I was an AP voter. Preseason, we just kind of guess. Week 1, week 2, you just kind of go with what's happened, and it all sort of shakes out. You can vote the other way and just say, well, we think this will happen. And then you all end up in the same place week 12 and week 13. So it doesn't really matter. But it's interesting that they did get 2 first place votes, which is 2 people saying, we think that's the best win of the year. Texas is winning Alabama. Florida State, they're at number 3 with 3 first place votes. Georgia, Michigan, 1, 2. Where is Colorado, number 18? Listen, just throw them up there. Put them in the top 10. Who cares? You're just guessing anyway. If they lose to Oregon and USC, you can knock them back out. But Colorado's the most fun story of the year so far. They've been fun to watch. They played one bad half. That was the first half of that game against Nebraska, and they still wound up winning 13-0 at the end of said half. So I don't. Why 18? Just put them in the top 10 for now. Again, who cares? Washington State coming in at number 23 after that win against Wisconsin, and that was just a great scene in Pullman. So happy for those people to get to show off how much they care, how great a football environment they have. It's just a horrible situation for Washington State and for Oregon State. And oh, by the way, they both happen to be good this year. So it's frustrating. But again, you guys run the Pac-12 now, change the name of the 2-pack, 2-team conference. I think you can do it for like a year or 2 provisionally. Have your game against one another, be in Las Vegas, put the championship logos on the field. Like, just have fun with it. If everybody's going to screw you, just enjoy it. Take their NCAA tournament money and spend it on yourselves. Like, who cares? This is a situation where 2 schools have been completely wronged, and they have a chance to at least have a little fun with the situation. Let them do it. And then go to the Mountain West, say, hey, we'd like you to join the 2-pack, and we'll call it the Pac-14. And then there you go. You got a conference. This is not that complicated, but I do want to see the 2-pack exist, and I really, really want to see a one-game season, one-game conference schedule where the one game is the championship game. That is all I need. That would make me happy in 2024. Before we go on and talk to Tim Watts from Bama Online about what went wrong for Alabama against Tennessee, we got to talk about Prize Picks. Now, I had a tough go of it with Prize Picks this weekend. So I had a situation where I played 4 squares and I did the flex play option, which is basically if 3 of the 4 hit, you get 5 times what you bet. So I had Bo Nix more than 24.5 rushing yards. He had 46 against Texas Tech in Oregon's win. I had Evan Stewart more than 69.5 receiving yards. He had a great day for Texas A&M, 114 receiving yards, and it wasn't the Texas A&M offense, and that's something we'll talk about later in the show as well. But Jimmy Horn for Colorado, that with Colorado receivers, it's just you're going to be playing guess who's going to blow up today, because that's the deal. They've got so many options out there, and it's going to be hard to figure out from week to week, day to day, who the best player is going to be, who's going to be the best in that particular matchup. It was Xavier Weaver against Nebraska. Travis Hunter, he didn't catch as many passes, but he had a decent per catch average. And then Jimmy Horn, they fed him. I had more than 68.5 receiving yards. He had 64. So I basically was 5 yards short of winning this bet. The other one, I had Kyle Ferry, the kicker for Mississippi State, more than 1.5 field goals. I was thinking, okay, they're playing Arizona. Arizona's going to maybe make a couple red zone stops, force some field goals. There was only one. And as they went to overtime, I thought, okay, maybe Arizona stuffs them. Mississippi State can kick a field goal and move on in overtime. Nope, Mississippi State scored a touchdown in overtime. Good for Mississippi State. It won them the game, but not so great for my Prize Picks play. But that's okay. I can try again. I was this close. So Prize Picks is your best way to play daily fantasy. You can play it in 31 states, including Florida, Texas, and California. And if you use the referral code Andy, they will match your first deposit up to $100. So if you deposit $100, they'll match $100. If you deposit $50, they'll match $50. So referral code Andy, and they'll match you up to $100. It is so much fun playing Prize Picks. Is one of my favorite things it starts Tuesday, Wednesday, where they start loading in the college football stuff. And then Thursday, it starts coming hot and heavy. By Thursday night, there's all kinds of different options for the weekend. And then Friday, you just kind of go through. Like I was watching the Kansas-Illinois game and just going through all of the different picks and all the things I could play. And it was a lot of fun. So next week, I'm going to do better, but that's all right. Go to Prize Picks, download the app, referral code Andy, and they'll match you up to $100. Next up, we saw how Texas dominated Alabama. What went wrong for the Crimson Tide? Tim Watts from Bama Online joins us to explain. We are joined now by Tim Watts of Bama Online, and I told Tim before we started recording it was a coin flip, him or Bobby Burton. But I was going to only ask Bobby Burton, how's it feel to have an awesome team right now? Tim, there's a lot more questions to ask about Alabama. And the first was probably, one of the first questions that Nick Saban got last night, which was, are you sure Jalen Milroe's your guy?
I like it noted for the record that at any other moment in my life, how you let off a coin flip between you and Bobby would offend me so much I'd hang up and be driving on my way to your house. So for the record, no, I'm just kidding. I get it. Yeah. You look at the checklist of things Bama couldn't do and win. And if you look at the checklist of what Texas needed to not do to win, they both checked it off. Bama with the turnovers, Bama with the penalties. It's not as simple as that, though. Obviously, There's more to it. But, 2 bad turnovers, penalties that took 2 touchdowns off the board, even though they got field goals. So a test of where you're at, is what we saw. And I think we know where Alabama's at. And I think we have a better understanding. I think Texas is a good football team. I thought they were a good football team coming in. And certainly, left thinking that's a pretty good football team.
Were you surprised that Alabama's offensive line struggled as much with Texas's front?
Yeah, I thought they had a good defensive front. I think Bo Davis is a good coach. I think they've got good talent over there. I wasn't super surprised Alabama didn't get a great push the week before either. I thought maybe they went a little vanilla and we're going to see a little bit more, hell, you had Proctor over there struggling as a true freshman against a pretty smart defensive attack. You didn't see a lot of help over there, guys chipping and, trying to help him out. He was kind of on an island. So I wasn't completely caught off guard. I didn't expect him to dominate the Texas defensive line. I expected him to be more competitive, though.
Yeah, although part of it, I will say, and I was watching the offensive linemen and their body language on some plays. Some of it is the way Milroe plays as well,
absolutely.
because it does feel like he's walking into some things that maybe a more pure pocket passer doesn't.
Yeah, and sometimes those holds are simply you're pushing a guy left, and then all of a sudden he's cutting back, and you're having to reach out and grab him. A lot of that's dictated. You see that at any level on the reaction of the quarterback. So I totally agree with that. I think it was a little bit of everything there. I think they made it almost one-dimensional at some point. I mean, Alabama did a fine job throwing the ball deep, but they didn't really decide to do that until mid-second, maybe late second. They had some success there, but anything in the middle was a battle. I thought Alabama's wide receivers did a good job, and that was one of the questions we had. Was Alabama's wide receivers going to have a lot of drops, which they didn't. They made some great plays, a couple of times ended up on their head, and so they stood up there, and also felt the Alabama defense was a better tackling team. Mm-hmm. In fact, I had some former Bama staffers in the NFL texting me that same thing. They felt they were more fundamentally sound, but I mean, that's a lot, without any quarterback pressure, that's a lot of time to try to guard a couple really fast wide receiver, and they got that freaky tight end to boot.
Yeah, J.C. Sanders had a great game, and that's the thing I wanted to talk to you about, because I found it fascinating, and we put a graphic out last week at On3 that I thought was really interesting, and it was Texas versus Bama rosters as recruits, and Bama had twice as many 5-stars, 16-8. They had 50 top 100 prospects to Texas's 18. Their blue chip ratio was 89 to Texas's 61. Their number one position players, this is where it was close, where the person was the number one position player in their class, was 6-5. But it looked to me like Texas had the better counterpart at most positions. Like if we're talking about JT Sanders, certainly the best tight end. Worthy or AD Mitchell was the best receiver on the field. Ewers was the better quarterback on the field. Kelvin Banks was the better left tackle on the field. Tamondre Sweat was the better defensive tackle on the field. Like that was the part that was shocking to me, because, Alabama has always taken this raw material and developed it really well too. We haven't seen that as much with Texas, but I mean, Texas's players looked as good or better in terms of, like, if you were an NFL scout trying to figure out who you want to pick, as Alabama's.
Yeah, I think offensively, I think Sark went heavy there. They've been active in the NIL. That's why that offensive line is so good. There's been a lot of discussion about that. Very good offensive line. Great. He's obviously a good offensive mind in his own. So you put an offensive line there. I think Quinn Ewers was the number one quarterback in his class. Xavier Worthy, I don't know if he's a 5-star, but I remember knowing how talented he was following his recruitment. And he reminded me a lot of Devonta Smith, Smitty at Alabama.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of Alabama recruited him too. Remember, he was committed to Michigan, got out of that, ended up at Texas. Alabama recruited both times. Obviously, the other wide receiver would have been better at Georgia. Not really a wide receiver passing attack the last couple of years. Talent for sure was on offense they had. Sound like Yoda there, don't I? They definitely had offense on the Texas side. They definitely had offense on the Texas side of the ball. I never had any doubts about that coming in. And you knew Quinn Ewers is a good quarterback. You don't get any pressure on a good quarterback. You're going to obviously have a chance to make him great. And I think that's what they did last night. You just didn't see Alabama win any one-on-one battles on the defensive line. And you didn't see a lot of scheming to try to get guys near him. And part of that was, again, the skill set. You got running backs that can catch the ball. They're fast. Wide receivers that can beat you deep. You got tight ends. So it's hard to bring a, cheated defender in there and not have to worry about getting beat.
So this makes me wonder, because LSU has a pretty talented roster. Texas A&M has a pretty talented roster. Looking down the schedule, Tennessee has a very talented roster. Is it possible that Alabama's going to have other games where they won't be the more talented team?
On paper, I mean, that's one thing. I still think Alabama's got a lot of talent on the field. Not being the best wide receiver in that of that duo last night. You got a guy that's probably a first-round pick and probably a second-day pick at worst for Texas. You got a tight end that's going to get first-round consideration. You got a quarterback that's going to go in the first 3 rounds. I think it's still to be determined exactly where he goes. There's a lot of talent out there. I mean, Knobloch was no joke either. He had some plays for Alabama, did some nice things, and Alabama's wide receivers made some big plays themselves. So not being as good as Texas on that short end for Alabama doesn't mean they lack talent. They've still got a lot of talent. They just got to get it out there, figure out. To me, the first question is, what is Milroe? We know what we think he is. How are you going to use him? You can't really put in a A.J. McCarron game plan for him or a Bryce Young game plan. You almost got to use him more like a Blake Sims. He's going to throw the ball deep, let him power run. I mean, again, he's built like Herschel Walker. It's a big, muscular, weightlifting guy back there. If you're going to run him, have a meaning to him. And one of the things I thought Texas did the best job of that nobody's mentioned really is they had a spy on him, a big athletic kid that can run with him. Kind of contained him. He got loose a few times, did some nice things with his legs. But for the most part, with all that pressure coming up front, I would have expected bigger runs.
Yeah, that's what I figured. He'd just kind of get out the back door. But they did a good job spying him. And they just had some good athletes running after him too. Like Anthony Hill, we all knew he was a good player. He was another one of those number one in his class kind of people. But I thought they did a good job using him. It kind of felt similar to what LSU did with Harold Perkins last year, where you put him in a fairly simple situation schematically and say, go get this guy. And he did a good job of that.
Yeah, as far as Alabama's concerned, they definitely have games to circle. Texas A&M, I know they got throttled, took a pretty big loss to Miami. There's still going to be a handful of College Station. That game's been very competitive every year, whether, matter, what the other team was ranked. LSU's obviously a big game. Auburn, I know Auburn isn't, the team we're used to, but you've seen that several times. Going to Auburn is not easy for Alabama or anybody. We've seen a less talented Auburn team be very competitive. I wouldn't expect anything less this year, but Alabama should have the most talent as they go through the rest of the schedule. I can't think of anybody off the top of my head where they don't match up well.
Yeah, there's nobody obvious, but it's weird because I trying to remember the last time, even the game they lost 44-18 to Clemson in the national title game, it didn't feel like Clemson had a vastly superior roster to them.
Oh, they had Alabama's offense that year was 2, that's 15 NFL starters right there. They definitely Alabama had the roster. They just, had their number, out schemed them in that game. But yeah, when I look at Alabama's schedule, of course, I didn't think coming into this, Alabama was like a heavy national champion. I know that caught buzz for 3 weeks. I haven't seen a great team overall. Michigan's been really good. Georgia's been really good. Haven't had super competition, but I've seen teams struggle. You've already got Texas A&M, LSU with losses. Obviously, I think Texas is going to end up being one of the best teams Alabama plays this year.
So, Tim, you cover the recruiting piece of this, and I'm curious, at what point did Alabama just did they stop getting everybody they wanted, and it started getting more competitive for them?
Well, they had maybe the number one class ever on paper last year. I know it seems like it's a lot further off, but I mean, you look at everybody they got impact guys at every position on the football field. And especially, probably the weakest would be your favorite was the quarterback position. We know how you love Dylan and still hearing great things about Dylan. So if your weak area in recruiting class is signing 2 top 100 quarterbacks, it's probably been a good class. This year, I think they've ran into having to recruit against that class. I mean, it's not just them that happens to. I mean, when you have guys that heavy in a class, I think it affects the next class that you're running up on. Georgia's faced that a little bit too, and it's hard to go back to back with number one classes anymore. Factor in the NIL, we see kids going all over. It's just a different ball game. But Alabama, with that said, Alabama has a top 5 class. I think they have the number 1 2025 class. So they're still getting plenty enough talent to be competitive year in and year out.
That's what I'm wondering about is just it feels like they don't have the prohibitive talent advantage that they used to have where their backups could beat most teams' starters. It feels like, and you see this, because I put Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State in the same bucket, and you're seeing guys who would have gone to those places that are now going to Tennessee or to Missouri and that's where I'm wondering where that starts to show with some of these superpower teams. Like Texas is a little bit different because Texas has always recruited highly ranked recruits. They're just,
Sure.
I think they're developing them better now. But I do wonder if that does catch up to the superpowers at some point.
Well, I think, Missouri got, one of maybe the best defensive tackle in the country, but I mean, he's going to be an impact guy from statistics, but I mean, how many extra games will one player win? You obviously got to string classes together, which is what Georgia's going to do. I mean, you have 5 top 3 classes that say Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. Missouri can handpick one guy in each class, and that's just a hard obstacle to overcome. But I mean, those big names that you see, Auburn's got a bunch of guys. Auburn's got several guys that Georgia recruited, Alabama recruited, Tennessee recruited. They did a good job, getting guys down there that you wouldn't normally expect, especially coming off the Harsin era. So you've got to factor all that in now. I mean, you got the NIL, you got the portal, you got instant playing time, you've got everything going on. But I don't think that's an excuse for the top tier programs. I mean, Alabama is going to have talent to compete. Georgia, Ohio State, USC's up there, and there's other schools I'm probably forgetting to mention. They're always going to have that top 10 talent.
I just think it makes things more interesting. But one of the things that we thought made the preseason more interesting, and we were joking about this before we started, is the Nick Saban relaxed. I mean, he's smiling more. He apologized to a reporter for the way he answered a question. I mean, you're just not used to seeing that from Nick Saban. And I joked, oh, they're gonna destroy everybody. But I was joking. Like, I didn't actually think because Nick Saban was smiling that made them appreciably better. But where do you think that came? Like the college game day guys all picking Alabama as their SEC champion. And you've said it multiple times. You didn't necessarily see that when you looked at the roster. Where do you think that came from?
I didn't see, to me, I think it was a lot was to be determined. I felt Bama was a good team. I still think they're a good football team and have a lot of potential, including winning the SEC or going to the SEC championship and making the college football playoffs. Obviously, you got things to clean up, but I still feel that way. But to me, it was odd that it was like a lot of people were down on Alabama. You saw a lot of people picking 3 or 4 losses, and then all of a sudden you had a bunch of people picking them as national champions and beating Georgia and SEC champions. I was just curious, what are they basing that on when they didn't even know who the quarterback was when they were making those predictions? I just thought, don't you want to see who's taking, snaps and, figure that whole thing out, before you make that prediction though. But I know the media can have that snowball effect. You get somebody to throw it out there. It sounds like a good idea. And we all begin to spitball it and add on it and, get that thing rolling down the hill. But, again, there's a lot of football to be played. We look back 6 weeks from now, maybe Texas is number 1 team in the country. And that loss, You're like, shoot, Bama did a pretty good job to hang with them. Or Texas has 2 of those losses that they seem to have, in their past. And you're like, boy, Bama, really, it really is a bad loss. So college football to me this year was that way last year. So much left to be determined.
Yeah. And I'm happy about that. I like that because I've watched Georgia a few times, and granted, they're not playing anybody yet, but they don't look perfect right now. So it does feel like everybody has a chance. And I think that's a little bit different, but you're right. We may look back on all of it. Like, I may look back at some of these questions I've been asking you 10 weeks from now and be like, well, that was stupid because Alabama's just fine. So,
yeah, but no. I think it's legitimate to question it. I mean, we're in week 2. We've got a Clemson, Alabama, and LSU with a loss. I mean, there's 3 top 10 teams basically that have a loss already. I mean, of course, they could finish 14-1 in national champion. I don't think Clemson could, but the other guys, all have stuff to clean up right now. But yeah, I mean, some of these teams that we think are great maybe have a couple losses. I still don't know what to make of Michigan. They've looked really good to me, but Ohio State's looked bad. But you know how that goes.
Yeah,
what's everybody showing this early?
Got a lot of good players. It's just like Alabama. Like, if they turn on the Jets and all of a sudden everybody clicks, there's nobody in the country that can beat them. So
yeah, that's. I mean, a lot of things left to play. Georgia looks good. Doesn't have a tough schedule. Have to get into the SEC and see who are they. They could be playing a really good SEC team in the West, or they could be playing the easier opponent, then go to the playoffs. But they're going to be good. Kirby Smart's a terrific coach and plenty of defensive talent, very aggressive. So I love it. I mean, I'm, as an Alabama guy, I'm not happy Alabama has a loss, but I do love that college football. Like, I looked at the slate of games this weekend. I'm very disappointed. Might cut my grass for the first time in 22 since I had a child, on a Saturday. You know what I mean? Like, gosh, it's bad. So I'm glad there's good games and we get to watch them and, everything that goes on. But I think Alabama at the end of the day will be fine. Maybe not by Alabama standards. That's such a high bar to set. And, the fans still want the 2011 defense and, those guys that were just monsters that, there's a reason we thought so much of those teams. We never really had seen them, except for the U. Miami has some teams, USC has some teams defensively, and it's just hard to put those groups together.
Yeah, and like the 2017 recruiting class, you
Yeah,
may never see anything like that again. It's that good. So, well, Tim, I appreciate it. Little dose of common sense and reality for the folks. How's your message board holding up? Everybody okay?
It's kind of like they knew. They were wondering about the quarterback position the whole year, and you saw a mixture of Milroe and penalties and no defensive pressure, untimely turnovers, and it's kind of their worst nightmare. I mean, you flip the penalties and the 2 turnovers, and Bama probably wins that game. But that's a lot of games when you got 2 teams. The guys, and the penalty turnovers were really bad. I mean, those were bad picks, obviously, and the defense did good just to keep one to a field goal. But I think the message board's all right. I mean, you get, Bama fans aren't used to losing, but they'll bounce back.
Well, Paul Feinbaum will get a few phone calls tomorrow. That's all that really matters. Tim, thank you so much, Tim.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
What did I say last week? 2 possible reactions after Nick Saban apologized to a reporter. If the Alabama won, all the think pieces on how he's a new generation or new coach for a new generation. Alabama loses, Paulie's gone soft. You will hear those. You're going to hear those tomorrow on the Feinbaum Show. I guarantee you that. You know what else you're going to hear? You're going to hear a lot of Colorado press conferences because they're really interesting. The post-game press conferences at Colorado are fascinating. Now, maybe they won't be if they don't win, but so far, after 2 victories, they've been really, really interesting. Shedeur Sanders was the one who stole the show this time. He had an incredible game against Nebraska. He didn't throw for as many yards as he did against TCU, but I almost feel like he had a better game because he was willing to stand in, get pummeled, and he's really accurate. He's decisive, and he's a lot of fun. He's about as good as his dad on the mic as well, and that's maybe even more impressive. So every Sunday this year, we're going to take you through a bunch of post-game press conferences and try to kind of dissect what happened over the weekend. We will start with Shedeur Sanders talking about the respect, or maybe lack of respect, for Nebraska and from Nebraska.
It was extremely personal. We go out there, warm up. You got the head coach for the other team trying to stand in the middle of the buff. Like, it's okay if like, a couple players do it. It's fine, Like, just enjoy the scenery. But when you got the whole team trying to disrespect it, then I'm not going for that at all. So I went in there and disrupted it. So they knew off rip, like, nah, the Buffaloes mean a lot to me. And personally, that's what I was saying pregame. And that's when I knew it was just extreme disrespect. And that's why it was the coach said a lot of things about my pops, about the program, but now that he want to act nice, I don't respect that because you hating on another man, you shouldn't do that. So it was just all respect was gone for them in their program. Now I like playing against their DC, I like playing against them, but the respect level it ain't there because you disrespected us first.
So if you're looking at what did Matt Rhule say about Deion, I think they're inferring that Rhule was talking about Deion, and there's a good chance he was in some preseason comments about Rhule got up at one point and said, you'll hear other coaches saying, wait till I get my guys in the portal or I'm bringing my guys. That seems like a pretty clear reference to Deion Sanders. And, Rhule is working more with what he inherited at Nebraska than Deion is at Colorado, but the job is to win games. And Well, they played and Dion won. But the other part of it is one of the transfers that Matt Rhule brought is the subject of a lot of the biggest questions, because Jeff Sims, who was a quarterback at Georgia Tech before he came to Nebraska, has committed a lot of turnovers, and a couple crucial ones in the loss to Minnesota and multiple crucial ones in the loss to Colorado, when Nebraska was in the game and playing very well in the first half. And basically they had their quarterback handing Colorado points. Here's Rhule after the game talking about those turnovers.
As I was walking off the field, one of their longtime coaches who I've coached against many times, he said, "Hey, coach, uncharacteristic of your teams, you have that many turnovers and give so many plays away." I think 17 points off turnovers, and that's the same thing as last week. So, I'll be honest, I really think we're better than we're showing. But what does that mean? That's just words. So, I told the team, we're gonna get this right. I'm going to get this right. We'll get the offense right. We'll get the turnovers right. I thought the defense played really hard and well for long stretches, and then eventually just kind of wore out. But I thought we were able to control the line of scrimmage some with some power running game in the first half, but had the ball in the red zone twice, and yet again came away with no points. So really the same tale as last week, just versus probably a little bit more explosive offense that got away with, the game got away from us.
Rhule got a good question after the game about whether he thought about pulling Jeff Sims in favor of Heinrich Haarberg, and it was a pretty definitive answer.
Yeah, there's never thought of putting Heinrich in. We have some plays for him, that we were going to potentially utilize. So he might have been getting ready for one of those things. I think, for me, I won't be able to really comment, truly. because it's such a big deal to comment on the quarterback, right? So we know globally it's too many turnovers, but in terms of what exactly went wrong, was the center late with the snap? Was the motion? I have to go back and look at those things. And then we had some good drives. You had a penalty all of a sudden, that had nothing to do with the quarterback. So for us, I think if you look at the year so far, I think we're probably we've taken one ball away, right? And we've two now right at the end of that game, but so we're -6, and that is sort of the story that we've been trying to fix, and so I haven't gotten it fixed yet, and I'm going to keep doing it keep working on it until we get it fixed.
So Rhule's just going to have to figure that out. He's going to have to go in there, watch the film, determine how much of this is on his quarterback, and then decide, is it worth trying something else? And my guess, if you are that sure that you never thought of putting the backup quarterback in, that means you had quite a bit of separation between number one and number two in the offseason, and you feel like there's a significant amount of separation now, and that it doesn't help you to change. If this keeps happening, they may have no choice but to change, because they're in games. They should have beaten Minnesota. They were very much in the game against Colorado. It probably, based on what we saw, should have been 0-0 at halftime. That defense has played really well, and it probably feels a little like, we said this on Saturday, but it feels a little like Iowa's defense did last year, where the defense is playing great. The offense is just kind of not ever getting it together. The opposite problem happening at Texas A&M. Last year it was, when's the offense going to work? What are you going to do? Hire a play caller, Jimbo Fisher. Well, he did that. He hired Bobby Petrino, and the offense running smoothly. Connor Wegman looks fantastic at quarterback, but the defense was the problem in the loss to Miami. Tyler Van Dyke felt like he could sit back there forever. And then once the Hurricanes receivers did catch the ball, they weren't getting tackled. Jimbo Fisher talked about a couple of things involving this. This is a mashup of two different answers. He answers a question about tackling, and then he gets a question about pressure.
We didn't tackle well. We had guys that we could have tackled, and we tackled poor in space. And that's one thing we did.
Oh, Jimbo Fisher not working for some
reason.
We
didn't tackle well. We had guys that we could have tackled, and we tackled poor in space. And that's one thing we did last week. And they had yards after catch, and we had some guys with arms around them, and we just didn't make the plays and get them on the ground. They did a really good job running with the football, and we didn't tackle well in space afterwards.
There's been a lack of pressure both first two games.
We need more pressure. We got to pressure, find some different blitzes, or get some guys on the edge to create some matchups in there and get some rush. We said that we got to affect the quarterback a little more.
So not Jimbo Fisher's specialty, not his side of the ball. DJ Durkin, the defensive coordinator, going to have to figure that out. But it's so interesting, because Texas A&M, not a great run-stopping team last year, but it did feel like they could get pressure when they needed to, and that was not there against Miami. And maybe it's just because Miami's offensive line is vastly improved. They went and got transfer from UCF, transfer from Alabama, 5-star freshman Francis Mauigoa is starting at right tackle. Maybe that's it. Maybe they're just significantly better on the offensive line. And when Texas A&M gets into SEC play and they're playing your Ole Misses and your Mississippi States and your Arkansas, that they are going to be able to get pressure, or perhaps this was a sign of things to come. So we'll see. But the tackling piece of it also needs to be cleaned up. That was the yards after catch that Miami was able to rack up were significant. And teams are going to see that and just try to scheme guys open in space, give the quarterback a high confidence, high probability throw, and then hope they break some tackles. So that's the part that Texas A&M needs to get fixed. Jimbo Fisher, we talked about Mel Tucker. Jimbo Fisher also on a huge contract, $76 million they would owe after this season. So what are they going to do about that? We got some responses, by the way, to the Mel Tucker stuff. Todd Johnson asked, do you have to prove allegations or no? Todd, he admitted it. I don't know how else to explain this to you guys. The part that is going to be the thing that gets him fired or the thing that keeps him from ever coaching Michigan State again, he admitted to it. So we're not dealing with unknowns here. That's, I get that people mistrust the media or feel like everybody needs a fair shake, and everybody should get a fair shake. But he admitted it. The thing that's going to be the biggest problem, he admitted it. So you can say whatever you want, but all you're saying is you don't believe Mel Tucker? Because he admitted it. So now Jimbo Fisher is a different story because there is no scandal there. That's just a football issue. And they got to get it fixed, because if this season winds up being like last season, and we don't know that it will, because it could be that Miami's really good. That's the hardest part right now, is figuring out, is Miami good, or did Texas A&M give up a lot of points to an okay ACC team? My suspicion is Miami's going to be a lot better than they were last year. And why? Because they can block. And there's certain things that just travel. One of those things is a thing that Texas A&M is trying to recapture, and that's pass rush. If you're 4 defensive linemen, or your 3 defensive linemen and whatever linebacker you choose to bring, if they can beat the opposing offense's 5 offensive linemen regularly, you're going to win the game. If your offensive line is physically manhandling the other team's defensive line, you're probably going to win the game. So that's where Miami's at with the offensive line. They look considerably better. We know Texas A&M has really good athletes on the defensive line. We have seen that defensive line and those people get after quarterbacks in the past. That's what makes this so impressive. We have some evidence that maybe Miami is significantly improved in that position group, which I think makes the ACC race quite a bit more interesting, especially given what we saw from Clemson against Duke, given what we saw from Florida State and how good they looked against LSU and how good they looked against Southern Miss. I mean, Florida State did what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to win a game. And I mean, they put the hammer down. So, but Miami is getting there. When you can block, you get there faster. Mario Cristobal talked about the culture change that he is trying to affect at Miami, and how it was pretty hard last year, but feels like it's starting to work.
Well, I think it's credit to the players, because that's always been the goal. It's always, when you change regiments and you change cultures, you have a choice to make, and you could stick with what you believe in, and sometimes, it's ugly, as last year was. But if you believe in it, you make sure that the right people continue to grow and stay, and you bring in people that are like-minded and hardworking, and that's a nice combination, and that leads to better culture, better atmosphere, better environment, better programs, better businesses, better organizations. So that's where we feel that we're heading now. Today was a big step in that direction.
So we'll see what happens with Miami going forward, but again, the better offensive line part of it, that stuff travels. That if you can do that against Texas A&M, I feel like you can do that against most of the defensive fronts on Miami's schedule. Maybe not Florida State. Maybe not Florida State. And look, we saw how bad that game was for Miami last year. We saw how good Florida State's pass rush was against LSU. But can you block North Carolina? You know, North Carolina looked unblockable when they played South Carolina, but they didn't get all that much pressure against Appalachian State. They did not look as tough to block. Clemson, well, based on what we've seen so far, I'm not that worried about it. NC State, now maybe they can get some pressure. They do have a pretty good front seven. But let's talk about the team that played NC State yesterday. That is Notre Dame. So Notre Dame comes down to Raleigh. They knew the weather was going to be bad. They knew there might be a significant delay, and boy, was there ever. They get about a quarter and a couple of plays in, and then the dam breaks, and it's almost 3 hours before they're playing again. But they were buying bratwurst and hot dogs from the concession stands to keep the guys fed and keep their energy up. And they came out just like a ball of fire, 80-yard Audric Estime run pretty much right off the bat. And then they're forcing turnovers. They're capitalizing on those turnovers. And Marcus Freeman talked about the difference between this time this year and this time last year when Notre Dame was losing to Marshall and not being able to handle any adversity.
You know, I just got done telling the team it's great to be able to have some of those bumps that we talked about last year that cost us wins, victories, right? And you had some today, and we're still able to come out with a victory, and you can see what type of team we have, right? There's a lot of different elements today that really occurred with the rain to start the game, then the 2-hour delay, then we go back out there, it's still raining, and good things and bad things are happening, but the guys just continue to stay in the moment. That's been our message always, just stay in the moment, man. Do not worry about outcomes. Do not worry about last week. Do not worry about what happened in the first quarter. Just stay in the moment, and it was really good to see.
So Notre Dame plays Ohio State week after this one. We're going to probably make all the judgments we want to make about Notre Dame after that game. They also have USC coming up. Notre Dame has the schedule that, you know, usually with Notre Dame, with the 4-team playoff, which I know is not even a discussion after next year, but they have to go 12-0 to make it. I do think they have the schedule to make it at 11-1 this year. You know, they've got Ohio State. At Duke is suddenly looking quite a bit better. We'll see what Duke does going forward, but that looks quite a bit tougher. USC, we know what they are. If they can beat one of USC or Ohio State and be competitive against the other one, 11-1 might get it done. It might. 12-0 absolutely, obviously gets it done. There's no question about it. But 11-1 in that situation, depending on what happens in the conferences, might get it done. So I am very, very excited for that Notre Dame Ohio State game because, you know, you've wondered what Notre Dame would look like with a little bit better quarterback than what they've had over the past few years. Sam Hartman is that little bit better quarterback. And Sam Hartman, I think you pretty good idea of how different he is with Notre Dame's talent around him. He was a guy who went 1-2 against NC State at Wake Forest, where the games were all fairly close, but he threw, you know, quite a few interceptions in the last two meetings, and he looked much more confident, poised. You know, when you've got that line in front of you, it makes a big difference. So we'll see what happens. One more press conference clip before we get to the extra point, and that is from Houston coach Dana Holgorsen. Now, Houston played its crosstown former Southwest Conference rival Rice on Saturday. It was at Rice, and Rice jumped all over the Cougars, ended up hanging on for dear life and winning in overtime. It was a bad loss for Houston. As bad a loss as the UTSA win in the first week was good because UTSA was favored in that game. We didn't expect Houston to win it. But that's a really bad loss. But Dana Holgorsen, as Dana is wont to do, did not really mince any words after the game.
Dana, why do you think the guys during the week We had a good Tuesday, JD. We had a good Tuesday. Wednesday, the luncheon, I wasn't happy. We didn't practice good. I warned them. I don't know. Maybe we practiced too hard on Tuesday. I can't explain it. Maybe it's a trap game. Maybe it's a trophy game. Maybe it's a rivalry game. Maybe we were looking forward to Big 12 TCU. I don't know. Maybe we didn't respect our opponent and they whipped our tail. At the end of the day, it's on me. So
that first quarter, is it just things snowballing on each other?
It did. It did. Bad things happened. Momentum. It happens in football. I'm glad we squashed it towards the end of the second quarter, which gave us a chance. And it gave us hope. I talked about starting fast all week. We couldn't have started slower. I mean, I explained the importance of starting fast all week. They did, we didn't. Everything I'm saying, I'm responsible for it, and I will assume responsibility.
And he has to, and he knows he has to. And Dana Holgorsen also knows who he works for, and that's, well, you could say athletic director Chris Pesman, you could say President Reno Couture, but the fact of the matter is, when you work at Houston, you work for Tillman Fertitta. Tillman Fertitta is very demanding, and if he doesn't feel like the job's getting done, he will take decisive action and spend money to take decisive action. So Dana understands that. Going into the Big 12, they open Big 12 play against TCU. I think it's a really important stretch for Dana Holgorsen. They're going to have a decent showing in their first year in the Big 12 if he would like to make a second year in the Big 12 with Houston. Now we get to our extra point. I remember I said that Shedeur Sanders might be as good on the mic as his dad. The other question is he as good of a dancer as his dad? We all remember when Deion was playing in the NFL. I remember when he played for the Falcons and he debuted the primetime shuffle, which I might have tried to do in high school and failed miserably. But Shedeur Sanders did his own impression of the primetime shuffle. So here he is talking about he's talking about the crowd at that Colorado game, but then also his evaluation of his own primetime shuffle.
What was it like to play in front of this crowd?
It felt like it was at the spring game again. So yeah, it was a little red. I seen a picture when the stands was full of red a couple years ago. I don't know when that was, but I seen that. This year looked totally different. So our fans came out support. And the dance, it's in my blood, so I give it 10 out of 10. I really think I did better than him, honestly.
10 out of 10. Deion came in. He got asked about 10 out of 10. He disagreed.
Hey, Coach, I asked Shedeur to grade his primetime shuffle after he scored that rushing touchdown. He said it's in his blood, and he gave it a 10 out of 10.
It was horrible. It was horrible because he don't kick the feet up. He don't want it. Excuse me? No, he don't want it. He don't have. Shedeur's not a dancer. The only I can't dance either. The only dancer in our family is Bossy, my daughter. She's the only one that really has rhythm. The rest of us, we didn't get that. The Lord passed us when it came to dancing.
How are you not having fun with this team? This team is the most fun team in America. If they keep winning, they'll keep being fun. We'll see how it looks if they do eventually lose a game. But Colorado has Colorado State this weekend. College game day will be there. It's going to be spectacular. This whole thing has been fun to watch and fun to talk about and fun to debate. And I think probably going to win this one. Then you get that Oregon USC stretch, and then we find out how good Colorado really is, how good Oregon really is, how good USC really is. Boy, the Pac-12, it may be going out, but it is going out with a bang. Guys, we got a Dear Andy show tomorrow. You know how to find me. Just like Deion, I ain't hard to find. Andy_Staples on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it these days. You can ask me there. You can also email your question to andystaplesOn3@gmail.com. You can send it in words, send it in video. I will tell you, I got a question on Sunday morning. Popped in right when I was getting out of bed Sunday morning. Spectacular question. It's definitely getting answered. So try to beat that one. and you're definitely getting on the show. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you tomorrow.